Good evening, welcome. I was asked to introduce Steve, which is a special honor. What a beautiful turnout tonight. Um, so many people that many of you I recognize, a lot of new faces, but so many people that came together to hear the story. This is Steve's story. It's a story of his family, and it's also the story of the Jewish people of the last generation, and it's really a story of humanity. It's a story both, um, the background of Steve's story is terrible atrocities and hatred. Steve's story itself, though, is a story of perseverance, of love, of faith, of hope, of courage, and those two coming together really give us an important message, an important lesson for us and for future generations, both to be aware of the dangers, the evils that exist out there, and the caution we have to have, but perhaps more importantly, the hope and the courage that people like Steve and his mother showed during those times encourage us to learn, draw a little bit of that strength into our own challenges, our own relationships, our own small little moral choices we have to make. And so welcome, it's my honor to introduce Steve, who has a fascinating story of his own background. Please give him your utmost attention. Dr. Steve Felton.
Thank you, Rabbi. So I'd like to first say that Sally Brody asked me to speak, so I have to give her a lot of credit for us all being here. And of course, Roxy and Carlos did a great job putting this all together. So thank you. Thank you. Well, here I am in beautiful, peaceful Key Biscayne. And if you think about it, 80 years ago, the Holocaust took place. And it was evil beyond evil. And some people today still deny that the Holocaust ever took place. So I'm here to tell you my story, and I hope it has an impact in terms of your understanding of what really happened. So I was born in the Warsaw Ghetto in 1942, in the midst of the war. My mother and I were the only survivors of a very large family. My father and my brother were murdered in Auschwitz. My mother's 5 siblings and parents were shot by these what are called Einsatzgruppen. These were squads that were sent out by the Nazis to individual towns all over Poland to find Jews and kill them. I mean, it was Hitler's goal to exterminate the Jewish population in Europe, and he almost succeeded. 6 million is a lot of people. So, I came here, I was 5 years old in 1947, and growing up, I saw my mother pack a box once a year, a carton, with food and clothing, which she would send to Poland. And she told me it was the Polish family. So eventually I realized that I'm here because of my mother's love and courage, and because of this, the courage of this Polish family, the Matacz family, that eventually protected us. And what I have to say is, and I'll say this more later, there is obviously evil that took place, but there was also good. And try to explain why a Polish family would put their lives in danger, and really put their lives in danger to save my mother and me. It's like trying to explain why Hitler hated Jews and why he did what he did. It's hard to understand how people behave sometimes. And it's something that I would love to understand why the Matacz family saved us. And I've met them since, and I still don't get a good answer. Let me start by describing my mother's family. So my mother grew up in a small town in Poland called Mush. She had a very nice family. They had a farm, a poppy seed mill. They had lovely Sabbath dinners where they invited travelers to come and be comfortable. They made donations to the community. It was a very nice life. My mother decided she wanted to be a nurse, and she asked her parents if she could go to Warsaw to study nursing. And eventually they agreed. And this was when she was about 17 years old. It was 1934. So she went to St. Sophie School of Nursing. And she got in. She was the only Jewish woman to get into the nursing school. She got in because her brother was living in Warsaw. He was studying law, and he had some connections. She loved what she did. And she worked afterwards. And eventually she met my father, Victor. And he was a widower, and he had a son, a 9-year-old son, and they were married in 1939. Now, 1939 was a year where the people in Poland, especially the Jews, realized that something was going on. They knew that the Jews in Germany were being beaten, robbed, killed. They knew that was happening. They didn't think that would happen in Poland. But lo and behold, September 1st, 1939, the Germans invaded Poland, invaded Warsaw and Poland, and 1 month later, they had control of the entire city of Warsaw. So what happened subsequently was obviously bad for the Jewish population of Warsaw. A ghetto was formed in 1940. The ghetto was a small part of Warsaw that was walled off, and all the Jews of Warsaw had to move into the ghetto. Okay, let me describe the ghetto to you. It was 2.2 square miles, about the same size as Key Biscayne, almost exactly. Key Biscayne has a population of 15,000 people. At its peak, the ghetto had 460,000 people living in it. Life was really quite miserable, and what I'd like to do is tell you about the book my mother put together. So my mother, she didn't talk much about the war as I was growing up. But towards the end of her life, she decided to put it all down on paper. And so eventually I was able to get it published. It required some editing, but almost all the material in the book is her writing, with some modifications. And it's a beautiful story. I can't believe how well she wrote down her memories. And what I'd like to do is show you a photograph. So this is my mother's family. It's a little on the blurry side, but that's my mother's family. That's my mother right there. She was the youngest child of this beautiful family that really, everybody was happy. They were happy like we are in Key Biscayne. And all of a sudden, they weren't happy. What I want to do now is read to you from the book. It'll describe my mother's observations in the Warsaw Ghetto, because it's really hard to describe what it was like. But if I read it to you, I think you'll get a better sense of it. This is her writing. Alarming news began to pour into Warsaw about the fate of the Jews in the neighboring towns, of cruel beatings and murdering of Jewish people. They were chased from their homes and without food or clothing poured into Warsaw. Shelters were set up in schools, synagogues, and other Jewish public buildings. There were so many sick and hungry. As a nurse, I visited as many sick as I could, running through courtyards and climbing over roofs to avoid both the Poles and the Nazis. It was impossible to help everyone. And often we got caught in a crossfire between the Nazis and the Poles at random. The winter of 1941, this is in the ghetto, was harsh. Whole families wrapped in rags sat on the sidewalks, unable to move because their legs were frozen. I could not bear it. Oh God, why don't you help us? Why is the world silent? If they wanted to, they could help us. But no one did. Every day, more and more refugees poured in. Rich and poor were all alike, without a roof over their heads and without food. We had soup kitchens where one-dish meals were served, but those were not enough, and people were dying from starvation. Many Jews who left Warsaw in the beginning of the war returned. Many had settled with friends on the Aryan side, but after hearing of so many friends denouncing Jews to the Germans, they came back. The motivations for denouncing Jewish people were great. If you didn't denounce them, you would be killed. And if you were caught protecting Jewish people, you would be killed. So it was, for that reason, became dangerous for Jews to actually depend on their Polish friends. Death was an everyday occurrence in the ghetto. Typhoid, frostbite, and starvation were rampant. Whole families sat on the sidewalks with outstretched, skinny arms as they begged for a piece of bread. By the next morning, most of them were dead. The burial society traveled through the ghetto, picking up the bodies to take them to a mass grave in the Warsaw Cemetery, even though some were still breathing. In 1941 and beginning of 42, the Germans started what are called the actions. The actions was basically rounding up Jews in the ghetto and taking them to the trains and shipping them to the death camps. And that was going on for a year or so until eventually there was an uprising. There were about 40,000 Jews left in the ghetto when there was an uprising that took place, which was in 1943. But let me tell you, my mother found out, this was in 1941, she found out that her parents and her brothers and sisters were all murdered by these Nazi squads, the Einsatzgruppen, who would take Jews into the woods and shoot them and just leave them there. She found that out, and she was so depressed and upset that she took a bunch of sleeping pills. She woke up. She didn't die. She woke up. My father, Victor, who was he was well connected. He was an industrialist. He had a lot of Polish friends. He got a psychologist to come and talk to my mother. And he told my mother, you should have something to live for. You should get pregnant. I mean, nobody wanted to have a baby under those conditions, but she did. So she ended up conceiving in November of 1941. And I'm going to read you a little excerpt from what went on at that point. On the morning of June 13th, 1942, and she's pregnant now, I had a dream. I was home in Mush together with my parents' brother. This is a dream, it's not real. I was home in Mush together with my parents, brothers, and friends eating dinner. Suddenly, a big station wagon with SS was nearing our house. I became very frightened and ran away from the table looking for a hiding place. My father got up, took a napkin, put a coin in a napkin and said, "Dear daughter, you are pregnant. This is not the right place for you. Take this coin, this will keep you alive. Go home, you cannot stay here." This is a little bit further on. I was then about 7 months pregnant. The next morning, on June 14th, 1942, I started to have labor pains. My husband took me right over to Dr. Sarno. Dr. Sarno was a friend who tried to stop the pains without success. At 11 a.m., my premature baby boy was born. That was me. His weight was 2.2 pounds. Wow. An incubator was delivered to Dr. Sarno. We could only use it for a short time, while for a high price. After a few days, I wrapped the baby in cotton and put him on a white embroidered long down pillow. He didn't look like a real baby. He was so tiny I could not breastfeed him. So I extracted milk and fed him with a dropper. So what happened subsequently, that was in 42. My father, Victor, decided that things were getting so bad in the ghetto because of the actions. So what the actions were, the Germans would come to the apartment building. And of course, you probably saw this in the movies. They would march into the building, knocking on the doors, everybody out, out, out. Everybody had to get out into the street. And a lot of people at that time, a lot of Jews decided they would build bunkers, hiding places, to try to avoid having to go out into the street, because if you went to the street, you would be marched towards the Unschlagplatz, which is where the trains were that would take you to Auschwitz and Treblinka. So the bunkers were hiding places. My mother couldn't take me into a bunker because I would cry and give them away. So she wouldn't do that. So she would take me out into the street before they even came or when she saw them coming and just carry me. And for some reason, they ignored her. So that's how she got away with that. But things were getting so bad that my father, Victor, decided that he was going to get us smuggled out. So his plan was for my mother and me to be taken out of the ghetto. He paid somebody some money to do that. And he and my brother Stasio would come later, because to try to go all together would be too dangerous. So my mother and I got out of the ghetto. It was in April of '43. I was like about 8 months, 9 months old. Taken to a place in southern Poland, and my mother had false papers. She was given false papers. My mother, she was a very courageous woman, and she spoke Polish very well because she went to the St. Sophie School of Nursing. She had a lot of Polish friends. She knew the Polish customs, and she posed as a Pole. And I wasn't circumcised, so that was good too. And my mother knew the Polish customs. Like, she would hold me with her right hand, because with her left hand she knew how to cross herself when she passed a shrine. So she did all that. And she got away with it to some degree. There were always suspicions. Wherever she went, there were suspicions that she was really Jewish. And even in southern Poland, she was taken to the Gestapo offices several times on that suspicion. And she got away with it every time. But she was beaten at times. And at one point, she was staying with a family that didn't know she was Jewish. They thought she was Polish, and her husband was in the service somewhere in Russia. But things got so bad that she had to get away. So she took a train back to Warsaw. This was just about the time of the uprising, which took place in the spring of 1943. She didn't know what happened to her husband and my brother, because there was no communication. But she wanted to find out, so she went back to Warsaw. And when she got to Warsaw, she was robbed. She didn't have any papers anymore. And she didn't know what to do. She was desperate, and she tried to get back into the ghetto, but the ghetto was pretty much destroyed by the uprising, and she wasn't able to get in there either. So she walked around with me and finally realized that a good friend of her told her that if she ever had trouble in Warsaw, her brother, this is a Polish friend, her brother was a policeman, Stefan Matacz, and she should look him up. So she went from precinct to precinct and finally found Stefan. And Stefan then took us to his home, and members of his family ended up protecting us until the end of the war. We would go from one family member to another family member. Whenever there was a suspicion, we'd have to move. But they really did protect us. My mother worked as a nurse. She looked Polish. She acted Polish, so she got away with it, to the extent that she worked at a German field hospital. Finally, the Russians crossed the Vistula River into Warsaw and liberated Warsaw. So liberation took place, I think it was September of 1945, possibly earlier. And then things weren't so easy. Even after the war, what are people going to do? They try to go back to where they came from. They weren't welcome because whoever lived there had taken over their property. So a lot of people didn't know what to do. They looked for loved ones. They couldn't find them. My mother finally found out that my father and my brother were taken to Auschwitz from the uprising. Apparently they were part of the uprising, and they were killed there. By killing, that's a mild word. They were gassed and burned. So it was a tough time. My mother finally managed to go to an agency. She met my stepfather, and they got married in Paris in 1947, 46, and eventually came to the US. And I got to say that, coming to the US after all that misery and tragedy, people couldn't believe it. When the boat came to the New York harbor, and everybody, and I remember this because I just remember it, I was 5 years old. You could see the Statue of Liberty. And that's why on the book I have the Statue of Liberty, because it was freedom, it was liberation, it was, you had your life ahead of you and you can make what you want. It was that kind of country, a beautiful country we have. My stepfather studied engineering, my mother worked as a nurse, and we did well. My mother's goal was to have a family, to build a family again. And she did, and I'll show you pictures of the family. So this is my father's family. My father is that man right there. That's Victor. That's my mother and I in 1943. So this is the Montage family. That's Stefan, Maria. That's Helenka, who was my babysitter. When my mother worked as a nurse, that's my mother. She would take care of me. That's me. Okay, so when she worked at the field hospital, one of the doctors there, who was, I'm not sure he was German, he could have been Polish, took a great liking to me and gave me this, that's me on a horse with my babysitter, Helenka. I'm wearing you can't see it here, but I'm actually wearing a uniform hat there, a military hat. And that's my mother and me in 1945. And this is in France when we were there for about a year. And I remember I learned how to speak French. My stepfather, my mother, and me, after they got married. Okay, this is my mother. That's my mother right there. That's me. And that's my stepsister and stepbrother. My mother decided she wanted to have a family, and she did. My sister actually ended up having 6 children. Okay, so we went back to Poland in 1989, and this is Stefan and Maria. That's my mother. And it was so wonderful to see them. I couldn't understand anything they said because all the conversations were in Polish. My mother tried to interpret what they were saying, but she forgot to speak English. I mean, once she started speaking Polish, that was it. And that's my daughter, Jane, my mother. And this is my babysitter, Helenka. Yeah. And that's Wojtek, who was a friend. When I was a kid, he was a friend of mine that I played with when I was living with the family. Again, my mother wanted to have a family. That's my mother, my sister, and all her children. And this is a photo taken not too long ago of the whole family again. This is that's Barbara. That's our son Jake. That's my daughter Jane, her husband. That's me. And these are our grandchildren. So my mother succeeded. I mean, this is her way of defeating Hitler. Okay, now this is a really, this is the whole family. And let me tell you what happened subsequently after the book was published. I decided, and I visited the Montage family in Poland, and I heard about everything they did. So I sponsored them with the Israeli government to be designated righteous Gentiles amongst the nations. And that's a very special honor. It allows anybody who gets it to be a citizen of Israel, for example. So this was that get-together with the Israeli ambassador, and my whole family came, my sister and everybody else, and all the kids came to watch this honor being given to the Montage family. Okay, so this is that's the Israeli ambassador. Israeli ambassador giving the plaque to one of the survivors of the Martaj family, the oldest living survivor. And that's me standing there. So I just want to finish by telling you a little bit about me. You know, some of you may wonder, did I have any memories? And how did it affect my life in the future? Well, I do have memories. I have memories going back to when I was 2 years old, playing, 2.5 perhaps. I was playing with kids when we were with the Martaj family. They were neighborhood kids, and we played together. They made me take my pants down to see if I was circumcised. I remember that very distinctly. One other memory is we walked into a shed. I was with another boy, and there were bodies lying on the floor with their eyes open. And that was when I was about 2 years old. And then, of course, what happened as I grew up? I came to this country. I was 5 years old. I didn't speak English. And I would say, you know, how did all these experiences affect me? And I guess I've been more serious, and maybe I felt that anything could disappear at any moment, a little fatalism. And maybe that's because of my experiences. But what happened to me? I went to college. I went to graduate school. I got a PhD in chemistry. I then went to medical school. I started an ophthalmology practice that lasted 42 years and recently retired. So I've had a very successful life, and I owe that to my parents, to my mother, and to this beautiful country that we live in, where you have this kind of opportunity. And here we are in Key Biscayne. So I just want to say that Key Biscayne has been so welcoming to us. We've had such a great time here with the pickleball crowd and the bridge crowd and everybody else who's been so welcoming and so loving to us. So thank you very much. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Yes? Where did I get the title? Okay, so when I published the book, I worked with the English department of Stockton College in New Jersey. And the head of the English department, there was a woman by the name of Marion McLaughlin, not Jewish, but her specialty was Holocaust education. New Jersey required Holocaust education as part of the curriculum. I don't know how many states require that. But they did, and she was in charge of that. So I consulted with her, and she helped me put this together. And she came up with the title. I said, that sounds great.
Do you have books for sale?
I have a few books here. I don't have a lot. To get more books, I can order some if somebody wants to buy a book, or you can just contact the publisher to get a book.
The children of the family in Poland, when did they find out you and your mother were Jewish?
So the question was, when did the children in Poland with the Martaj family find out they were Jewish? I think they must have known right from the beginning. That family that I knew, Mietek was my sister's contemporary. And that was a very good friend that she had in Moorstadt told her about Stefan. But Mietek was also a friend. He was in class with her. He was part of the Polish resistance. And he knew she was Jewish, and I suppose everybody did, because he was the one who got her false papers and kept her moving from place to place. I remember when my mother worked, it was not only Helenka that took care of me, there was Grandma Frania, and she knew I was Jewish. I remember her because she had a very flat nose, and all you could see was her nostrils. I remember that very distinctly. And she was very strict, but she was a good person. Yeah, I think they all knew it, and that's what they did.
Even Helenka, who was...
Oh, Helenka, definitely, yeah. Yes.
She changed her diapers.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you weren't circumcised, though.
Well, I can tell you when I was circumcised, but that would be...
Fun.
That's it. Yes, sir.
With the exception of the Warsaw Uprisings and one or two other uprisings, I never understood why the Jewish communities in the ghettos, who knew what was happening because people were disappearing, why were there not more uprisings and civil unrest and protests?
Well, first of all, not all Jews knew that they were going to extermination camps. A lot of them thought they were told to bring extra food, extra clothes, because they were going to work camps. So that's where they thought they were going, and they were happy to get out of the ghetto. So some people marched towards those trains thinking that it was going to be okay. And then, of course, that's a good question, because I think about that myself. When the trains arrived at Treblinka and people had to get off the trains, there were dogs and people would, and Germans would go out with guns, and they were being pulled off the train. I mean, they weren't treated very nicely. Obviously, this was not a good thing. And then they were being separated. Those who were being sent right to the gas chamber and those who were going to be working for a while before they were killed. So I don't know why that didn't cause, a major uprising.
If you take the number of German soldiers, and I use that term lightly, the soldiers should be respected, versus the number of Jews in these camps, the ratio was maybe one Nazi to maybe 5,000 Jews. It would have been easy to overrun these Nazis, and it never happened.
It never happened. The question is, why didn't the Jews overrun the Germans in the camps themselves? Because the ratio was so high.
Because people were starved and they were being made to feel helpless and hopeless. So yes, at times there were a couple of uprisings, but most people didn't have the strength to even think they could do that. It was each day, can I survive today? Not, can I survive and overpower my captors? It was.
No, I agree. And if you look at, we see videos of what really took place. And there are some videos where Jews were taken to these pits. I don't know if you've seen those. They knew what was going to happen. They were naked, first of all. They all had to take their clothes off. Marched towards the pits, told to get into the pits, and then they were shot with machine guns. Why did they go into the pits? Why didn't they uprise at that point? I don't know. But it's got to be tough.
They were shot anyway.
Yeah, yes. You mentioned early in Warsaw when they heard the news in what was happening in Germany, that they didn't believe it or want to believe it. We now have a situation of anti-Semitism in the United States. Do you think that there are peoples or groups who would like to bring this to the United States?
Yeah. So the question is, what about the present? We have anti-Semitism in this country, and it seems to be on the increase. My perception of it is, and this is just me, anti-Semitism is always there, always. I mean, if you look at the history, I've been listening to a podcast called Ultra, which describes what the United States was doing in the late 30s. And the amount of anti-Semitism there, and even as our soldiers were fighting the Germans in Europe, there were Americans walking around Heil Hitler. And how do you explain that? I mean, it's just there. People, for some reason, Jews are always picked on as far as whatever.
Why?
Why?
Yeah, you're great.
Okay, Arthur?
Yeah, what was your mother's view on religion going through this, and after she looks back? How did she view religion and being Jewish and observing?
Okay, my mother was not particularly religious at the time when the war ended. She became religious because my stepfather was, and she had to become religious for his benefit. But she was very much into culturally and involved with the Jewish people. She wanted, I mean, when you talk about Israel being created in 1948, that was a miracle. I mean, she wanted a place for Jewish people to feel free, and Israel was the place. So she became a really strong Zionist. But she wasn't super religious. And, you know, I grew up in a fairly religious environment. I'm not religious, but I am very culturally attached. As the rabbi would tell you, I go to services here. Rabbi, I don't go to services up north, just here. Monica.
That was a good question, and I'm just wondering, was there any insight as to why the Germans singled out the Jews?
The question is there any insight as to why the Germans, why Hitler and the Nazis decided to eliminate the Jews? Well, I think it was mostly socioeconomic. I mean, the 30s were a really tough time in Germany after World War I. And a lot of people were... What's that?
Hitler's mother was Jewish.
Really?
Uh-huh.
Well, I didn't know that.
Yes.
Okay. But anyway, I think it was socioeconomic. A lot of the suffering that took place were blamed on the Jews because a lot of Jews were bankers. They had money, perhaps. So everything that was happening was the fault of the Jews. I mean, you know, that happens a lot. And you see that quite often when you see, you know, one group of people that are successful and another not. You blame the successful people for what's happening. But that's a really, I mean, anti-Semitism has been pervasive for 2,000 years at least.
Is any of your mother's stories or book or artifacts featured in the Holocaust Museum in D.C.?
Well, the Holocaust Museum has the book for sale, and I actually I was there and spent some time there. I used to take, when I was in Princeton, Princeton has a theological seminary where ministers are taught from all over the world, Africa, Asia. So these are adult students studying the ministry. And they decided, I'm not sure exactly who decided, that they would need some education about the Holocaust because they really didn't know anything about it. So they asked me if I would take them into the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. from Princeton. So we got a bus. It'd be filled up with all these students. And on the way to D.C., which took a couple of hours, I would talk about the book. And then they would be at the museum and partake in whatever lectures that were there. And on the way back, they would we would have a discussion. And a lot of these adult people from Africa, for example, didn't know about the Holocaust. So they were really amazed that something like that took place.
That anti-Semitism just exists. It's all of us that must make a change. And I don't buy that taking books out of libraries that deal with Holocaust, that deal with Black culture, that deal with LGBT status. It's not okay. We're all very silent and very comfortable in these environments. The question is, what are we going to do? Anti-Semitism is important to me personally. The percentage is 46% more than last year. That's a lot of anti-Semitism in this country of liberties. We are a patchwork quilt. We have people coming from Latin America, from all parts of the country and of the world. What are we going to do? Immigration continues to be a problem. I don't buy that we have to just accept that anti-Semitism exists.
And I agree. I don't think we should accept it either. And I think it's coming out. I mean, the fact that it's public knowledge and being talked about is a big positive. You know, oftentimes anti-Semitism is there, but you don't hear about it. But we are hearing about it. And I think people are becoming aware and perhaps will do something. I think this idea of taking books out of libraries, I just read that Jodi Picoult, you know, she's a wonderful writer. Her books are being taken out of libraries in Florida. Yeah. Yes.
We are supporting you. And the campaign is that nothing to do because I started 3 days ago, that you wear a blue square to show that we are with the Jewish community. So I'm asking all of you that there are no Jewish here this evening and you are here, make it from a piece of paper and draw around and wear it proud, like I am doing because I am with the Jewish.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, yes.
Like it's a situation in Israel where it seems like it's going to the same path.
Well, if you're asking my opinion, it may not be what everybody's opinion is. I'm against any kind of potential dictatorship. In this country or any country, I think it's, dictatorships end up being, at the extreme, it would be like a Hitler-like situation. So I think Netanyahu is heading in that direction, and I don't like it. But that's me. That's me.
Is there any outcry or any action taken against comments by a military and the Nation of Islam that is so disturbing?
Yeah. Well, you can't stop people from speaking in this country. And you have the most outlandish statements coming out of people's mouths. It's unbelievable what people say. Truly unbelievable. I mean, it's like, I can't believe anybody said that. There are so many examples of that. Holocaust denial is rampant. People say, oh, it never took place. People say we never landed on the moon. I mean, they say that too. I mean, okay, 9/11 was a Jewish plot. I've heard that one. People say terrible, crazy things,
While there's been an increase in anti-Semitism, there's also been an increase in people, young people who don't believe in the Holocaust.
That's right. That's why.
And there's more anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true.
Yes.
One of the best books written for young people about the Holocaust is by Horace Spiegelman, the book Mouse, which is written in a cartoon format to help young people understand what the Holocaust was. And it's been banned in a number of states. And people say, well, what can we do? You have to write to your school boards, you have to write to your congresspeople, you have to make your voice heard, because to go ahead and ban a book like that educates young people as to what the Holocaust was, it's criminal.
I agree. Totally. It's, I think, having this kind of discussion is, it's amazing to me that we're having this here on Key Biscayne, because I've spoken to Jewish groups mostly, and usually, I speak and that's about it. But here we're having this really excellent discussion about what's going on in the world as far as anti-Semitism is concerned. Yes.
Michelle mentioned an organization. I think some of you, or many of you, know about the International Fellowship of Christian Jews, started by Rabbi Eckstein, who unfortunately died recently, and his daughter Yael runs the whole operation, and they help the surviving Holocaust Jews who live like dogs. They're in their 80s and 90s, very poor, no running water, no food, and they wait for them to come once a month to bring a box of food. So if you're looking to support the Jewish people and the conditions that some of these Holocaust victims live in, please look that up and support that group. I know on TV they do advertisements all the time, and when you watch those, your heart breaks. And in this country, we do not, many people realize what we have here, and I was happy that he mentioned and showed you that Statue of Liberty, the freedom we have in this country, and how it's not appreciated. The other day I saw on TV, they did a survey. 38% of the people who took this survey thought they were patriotic. 70% said no, they weren't. And to me, that's a crime. So I thank you for being a survivor who has appreciated this country and has thrived in this country. May God continue to bless you and your family.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I like to comment on what he said about the youth in the concentration camps not doing a rebellion when they knew that they were going to be killed. But when you review human history, every nation that has taken prisoners do these terrible things to the prisoners, and the prisoners don't rebel. There is something in human nature, I think, that makes you think until the last minute that something will happen and you will save your life, or that for some reason you want to be killed. Maybe, I don't know, but I don't think it is right to state that they didn't do anything, although they knew they were to be killed. There are many factors in the way that humans behave, and that's one of them, that you think until the last minute that you will survive.
Yeah. Creating fear over a long period of time can do strange things to people. And the desire and the belief that you can live by not causing too much commotion.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's hard to understand, but it's true.
First of all, not only Jews were in the concentration camps. Remember that the Nazis were looking to get one, I don't know what to say in English, like one Lazaria, one single race. So they were against Jews, against gypsies, against a lot of minorities. So it's not only Jews. Second, when the people were moving to camps, first in Eva, camps, they didn't know where they were going. They didn't know they took everything. They were very weak. And like, I don't know, someone said we were, like, Jews were more than the Germans. It was not like that. They were in defense, or like, Rabbi, correct me if I'm mistaken, but the people, when they realized what they were doing, they were not even knowing that after the concentration camps, they were in the cameras where they killed them, the cameras, the gas cameras. So people didn't know what they were doing. And of course, there was a resistance, and there were lots. Nobody, like, it's not that they didn't do anything. Of course they did, but they were in a weaker situation. And that's pretty much, and this war was not only against Jews, even though 6 million people died.
No, you're absolutely right. There were homosexuals, all kinds of so-called undesirables that were taken to concentration camps and killed. But the Jews were the great majority of those people. And just to think about the Einsatzgruppen, these were their sole purpose. These were Nazi squads. Their only purpose was to find Jews and kill them in the small towns of Poland. That was their only job. They weren't there to fight anybody or their only purpose was to kill Jews. And they were called the Einsatzgruppen. So, that's the way it was. All right, well, yes, you want to say something?
I dealt with the 6 million that were killed. There might very well have been a cure for cancer, Alzheimer's, or resistance, like salt.
Of course, yes. These were people who were very productive. I mean, they were, eliminating a population like that was destroying the economy of whatever country they lived in.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was, it was a statement actually, that killing Jews would eliminate people who could potentially find a cure for polio and whatever. And that's true. I mean, I think Jews have been a very productive part of society. And if you look at a country like Israel, the amount of scientific progress that takes place there, medications and other things that help the humankind in general, it's by far much more productive than any other country per population. It's you know, I think it's crazy obviously to eliminate people who are very productive, but that's what happened. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Wow.
Thank you.